Hi, everyone.
Hello again. In the finished mystery, we have reached page 86. And for the next 3 pages, they're highlighting 3 more individuals from this group of 24 they've arbitrarily chosen to be represented by the 24 elders that are around God's throne in heaven. You don't believe these men that you're listing here from the Old Testament are going to heaven anyway. You think they're going to come back on the earth. But nevertheless, you've chosen them for some reason. We won't belabor what they put in these 3 pages, except to say it collects together as many texts as they can squeeze in, where David is talking about God's plan for the earth. And then Solomon only gets 4 lines in the 3 pages, but both of the texts they cite have to do with God's plan for the planet Earth. Well, Isaiah is the one we're familiar with, though, if we're Jehovah's Witnesses, because he gets 2 pages out of the 3. And most of those comments here, or paraphrases of what he says, have to do with his plan for what you now call Paradise Earth. Now, they didn't use that phrase back in those days, which makes it all the stranger that they collect all these texts together. And they don't make local applications of them, as they are if you read the originals. They make a generalized application to a new heavens and new earth.
You said the reason you found it a little strange, too, was because in the day of Russell, they still believed Israel had a specific purpose in Jerusalem.
Yes, so they knew in those days that there were earthly promises that were going to be literally fulfilled in the destiny of Israel, the people, the land of Israel, and the city of Jerusalem. But you wouldn't know that just reading these 2 pages devoted to Isaiah. They're being applied in the general way they do it nowadays to turn it into what they also call a global paradise today. In those days, they didn't use that phrase either. So it is a bit puzzling as to why in 1917 they're already on this track. But then you realize the Millions campaign is coming, and it's going to be about the earthly hope, and then by 1935 it's going to be officially about a good news about an earthly hope. In those days, in the wake of Russell, he has just died at this point. In the wake of Russell, the heavenly hope was still being stressed. So this shift surprised me when I reread this after all these years. The shift is already on, obviously, here to talk about God's plan for the earth and make you a part of it. So they're setting up for their new good news. There's no doubt about it. On the same page, though, where they're citing the usual paradise text from the book of Isaiah, they've also got a reference to Isaiah 19, something now they've completely dropped. And in the text at the bottom of page 87, it says, "At the time the pillar to the Lord is recognized in the world will return to the Lord, and what's that? He will be entreated of them and heal them." Well, that's a reference, actually, if you look it up, to the altar in the land of Egypt. And you realize, okay, this is a link to something we've talked about already in this Revelation, a finished mystery. They're linked with the Great Pyramid passages. And they're somehow finding their chronology of their day in the Pyramid passages.
So people would look at it and recognize it.
Yeah.
As God's plan, right?
Yeah.
That's what he thought.
And as you work through all of the comments here from Isaiah, you realize there's a couple of oddities, as well as the usual stuff, the paradise text. But one of the oddities is in the middle of page 88. They say that the skyscrapers will be turned over to wild asses along with the forts. And they reference Isaiah 32, where it talks about the towers falling. Now, I remember in 2001, a lot of Christians, wild-eyed Christians, looked at what happened at 9/11 and applied this text to it. This is a prophecy of the towers falling in New York.
So speculation is always, a danger, I guess you could say, at any period of time, where you make application to your own time about things that are happening. I know eventually things happen, but when you just take an event, no matter where it is, and apply it to yourself.
Well, of course, in those days, they're living in Manhattan, or in Brooklyn anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing towers rising up, at least one a year in New York, and I guess there was something obvious to see about that, namely that this has never happened in history, that so many towers are being built so fast. Of course, the bigger ones haven't even arrived yet, but they can also already talk about skyscrapers being a mark of the time of the end, which again is the risk you're always succumbing to. If you live in the middle of a situation, you always want to make it about yourself and your time.
Yeah, and find some fulfillment of it somewhere
But
in Scripture.
The big problem, though, when you spend two pages on Isaiah and don't seem to get the point, is the context. Like we've just said, all of this that is, if you read the original text in Isaiah, all localized references to Jerusalem and the land around Jerusalem, the land of Israel, all of them are being generalized here. You could take them in the sense they're not understand them today. These are references to a global paradise. There is no such idea in the Bible of a global paradise.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy based upon I think a need that they had then, because Barbour and Russell had both taught that by far the majority of the human race were going to come back in an earthly resurrection to have a second chance, because they hadn't understood the new light that you now have. They need to be assessed based on the optimum situation, a Edenic-like situation. They need to live in such a place, and they need to have such an opportunity to get the light. But of course, that's a fiction or a fantasy built by Nelson Barbour, borrowed by Russell, and still continuing throughout now 140 years of Watchtower history. They're still hanging on to this idea that most men need a second chance.
Yeah.
So of course, if they're going to come back to the earth, you're going to need space. So you extend the idea of Eden to the entire planet without any sanction from the Bible itself.
Yeah. I think this illustrates that they really didn't know how to read the Bible, because they're reading it looking for themselves in it.
Yeah.
And they're not looking at the text itself and finding out, okay, who is this to, and what is it about? And I would say a good hint that I learned was, whenever you're looking at a Bible book, look at the first verse in the Bible book, and usually the answer's there. Who's it being written to, and what is it about? That frequently happens. It does in Isaiah.
Let's give them an example. This is the New World Translation, is it not?
Yes.
What does it
This
say
is
in
Silver
the
Sword.
very first verse in the book of Isaiah, in the Silver Sword?
The vision that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem.
Same in my version.
Yeah,
ESV.
in the days of Uzziah.
Well, there's actually several kings listed. So it gives you the when, and it tells you the why. Why is he writing this? It's concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing in the book of Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel about anything but Judah and Jerusalem. But it's all related to Judah and Jerusalem. For instance, the references to Babylon and Assyria in this book, Edom, Moab, Ammon, they're about Israel. They're about Israel's destiny or Israel's historical situation. So if you don't take that as your rule, your hermeneutical rule in approaching Isaiah or any prophet, you're in trouble. What does chapter 2 say? I notice they've left out verse 1. And when they refer to Isaiah chapter 2, is the very first text they refer to, right?
That's true. They do. 2 to 4.
2 to 4.
That's the stuff we're familiar with as witnesses. We do the same. They still do this.
What's that text about, so everybody can...
in the final days, the mountain and people
flocking to the mountain of the house of Jehovah.
Streaming to it.
Right. But why have they left out the first verse?
And the pruning shears. All that stuff is in that text too.
Yeah.
Excuse me. The first verse says, "This is what Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the final part of the days." That's where we start.
So when you read in subsequent verses about the mountain of the house of Jehovah, how come you miss that?
Yeah.
And the answer is because you're trained to symbolize it. You turned it into a symbol in your mind because you were trained to.
Yeah. Even though verse 3 says the house of the God of Jacob, and out of Zion we've got Jerusalem is mentioned, even in the text part that we read.
Yeah.
But we spiritualize the whole thing. And I think the key is they take out one.
Yeah. All it takes is to take away the context, and in this case, both cases, it's the very first verse of the chapter.
Yeah.
And similarly, in their references to restoration of God's people, they have several texts on this, also from Isaiah, where it talks about God restoring land or places or heritages that were once desolate. But if you read the context of any of these in the original, you realize the desolation is of Judah, Jerusalem, Israel in general sometimes.
Right.
And the restoration is also about them. This is the same people.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd never know that from these paragraphs. You might take it as a general principle that God is going to restore the whole world. And of course, these famous texts from Isaiah 11, from Isaiah 25, 35, the same text you still use, look at them all in context. So that's the link we want to put into our Paradise Lost playlist. Paradise Lost for Jehovah's Witnesses, that is.
And the first video, Counterfeit Kingdom of the Watchtower.
The Counterfeit Kingdom of the Watchtower is the very first of those. I think there's about 20 videos, 21 maybe now. But the first 19 are the ones we recorded 5-6 years ago, because they're the ones where we discussed all of these texts in detail and looked at the context of all.
And I would have to say, for myself, the paradise idea was the hardest thing for me to kind of get my mind around. What do I do with all those paradise texts that I heard from the Watchtower?
Yeah.
Getting them in context will help you a lot.
Yeah. See you next time.
Bye.